Welcome to the Rotowire DFS podcast, brought to you by FanDuel.com, the leader in one-day fantasy sports. I'm your host, Josh Hayes, joined by Benny Ricciardi as we break down the Wednesday NBA DFS slate. You can find Benny on Twitter at BennyR11 and over at RotoCurve, Rotowire, and as a featured writer in the DraftKings Playbook. And you can also follow me on Twitter at JoshHayesFS. The Rotowire DFS podcast is available on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, currently, this second, live streaming on Google Hangouts. So you can check us out on Google Plus, or subscribe to the official Rotowire channel on YouTube. Make sure you check it out. Press that little red subscribe button. Benny, welcome to 22 teams in action for the Wednesday slate.
Yeah, this is a big slate. A lot of ways that we can go with everything. There's a lot of guys that I like, so I'm going to try to just limit it to who I think are my top plays at some of these positions. Otherwise, we'll be here all day.
Okay, fair enough. Let's, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. We've got almost everybody that available aside from the Golden State Warriors, which is a little bit disappointing, but also sort of a good thing too, because we can talk about who we want to pivot to aside from Steph Curry and all the other ballers on the Warriors. So let's go ahead and talk about it. What do you want to do at the point guard position here for Wednesday?
Yeah, when I first looked at this, I said to myself, I actually like the matchup for Chris Paul a little more than I like the matchup for Westbrook, with the two of them going against each other. But the more I look at it, I think I'm going to stick with Westbrook as my top play from this game. And the reason why is Chris Paul's price has gotten so expensive on most sites that you're not paying all that much more for Westbrook. So for me, I like Westbrook better, even though I think that, this game sets up as a game that's paced up, and the Clippers are going to play the starters the full amount of run. So the situation seems like it would be a better one for Chris Paul. But if I have to pay only a couple $100 up from Chris Paul to get Russell Westbrook, I still think I'd rather have Russell Westbrook than Chris Paul, which is why my decision has gone that way. So how do you feel about those two at the top? Because I think that's a big decision that a lot of people are going to have today of which one of those two, and probably one of the highest total games on the board when it comes out that people want to pay up for. I think for me, on sites where the price is, within a couple $100 of each other, I think I'm going with Russell Westbrook over Chris Paul.
Yeah, I think you can make a case for either in this spot. For me personally, I think I'm going to go with Westbrook in this spot, because you do have to pay an extra $800 on FanDuel, but we're talking about a guy who has, essentially scored 50 to 60 in every single game since February 19th. The only two exceptions was 48.3 and 49.9 against Dallas, and that, but no one else on the slate in my mind, even Chris Paul, at home, has 60-point upside. He's going to have Russell Westbrook defense on him. Well, and Russell Westbrook is a good defender. The one thing that will help Chris Paul is the pace is going to be pushed fairly high in this matchup, but he's the one true triple-double threat in this spot once again, and he's playing at such a high level, and I think it's a tick above Chris Paul. And the other thing that you have to worry about with Chris Paul too is if he gets down to the low 40s, you're down sitting at the low 4s in terms of price tag return, which is certainly possible. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with 16 and 14 with 2 steals and 2 rebounds. It's just not good enough for you to pay off 10K price tag overall. And that's something that can certainly happen to Chris Paul, but I don't think that floor is really, you're almost not going to see Russell Westbrook at all in the low 40s in any matchup. He hasn't been in the low 40s the last time he was in that spot was January 22nd. We're talking about, over a full month of, essentially 50-point plus fantasy production on average. So safer, consistent guy, at least for cash games. That if you want to pivot into a different direction for GPPs, I'm fine there. So speaking of pivoting down from the top options, how do you have that shaking out?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not really a big fan of a lot of the guys a little bit below him. You got a banged up Kyle Lowry. You got Damian Lillard going up against Boston, who has good point guard defense, mostly because he'll probably be guarded by Avery Bradley, I think, at least for a little bit of this game. John Wall against Minnesota, I guess, would be the only other guy that's in a decent spot. But Wall is almost the same price as Chris Paul right now. So it's the same situation that I have looking at Westbrook versus Paul as I do looking at Paul versus Wall. Try saying that 5 times fast. If you're paying basically the same amount of money for Chris Paul and John Wall, I'd rather pay up a couple $100 and take Chris Paul there. So really looking at the top options, there's not anybody else that I'm really looking at. What I'm probably going to do is go down to some of these value guys that we have, which is something else I think we should talk about. So how do you feel about guys like, Shelvin Mack, who's been putting up a good return for minimum price? Patrick Beverley, who's a guy we've been using a bunch. Corey Joseph, if Kyle Lowry is out again, are we willing to give him another shot? Maybe even like a DJ Augustine at mid price who's been playing a few more minutes. I think my second point guard is going to be somebody in one of those price ranges. I kind of like Mac the most, I think, if Lowry is out. If Lowry's in, I'm not going to mess with Lowry defense. And in that case, I'm probably going to go with Patrick Beverley against the New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously all price dependent, but that's kind of the way I see some of these cheaper options shaking out. How would you rank those guys?
I'm good with making Mac Daddy. That's for sure. He's, the price has been very slow to creep up because the production hasn't been terribly high overall. But you once you crack it to the 20-point range, you're in 5x territory, and then anything above that is very good. He actually dipped down because he had a bad game against Brooklyn, and then popped back with 18 points. The only thing that was disappointing to me so far is that he hasn't been assisting enough from that. He's doing a good job scoring and contributing in a little bit different spots here. And I guess in some ways that's sort of fine too, because Kyle Lowry is generally a strong defender, so maybe that's a situation that we can sort of, hey, let's go into a different direction here. I'm still going back to the well with Bev. I don't care that he got hated on for minutes against Portland in the last matchup. If he would have or hit it on production wise, if he would have just creeped up into a little bit more of a value situation in that spot against the San Antonio Spurs, we would have been talking about 5x plus in 4 straight games. So I think you're in a once again in a good spot with him against the New Orleans Pelicans, who don't have a great defensive answer. They're still starting Norris Cole and still playing Drew Holiday off the bench, which is ideal for defensive matchups. So I'll definitely take Russell Westbrook and either pair him with like Shelvin Mack or Patrick Beverley, depending on who I need to, how much value I have available to me to save some cash. The other thing I think we need to keep in mind here there as well is Ish Smith has quietly been super productive, 25 and 7 in the last game against John Wall defense, which is pretty surprising there as well. And I think I saw something about Isaiah Cannon starting in that matchup. Did you hear anything about that for Philadelphia? And is that anything that we need to pay attention to? Because this is back-to-back games where it's 6x plus.
Yeah, he I think he started the last game at the shooting guard spot. Right. So if he's going to be pushed into the starting lineup for like minimum price, I think he's another one of those guys that's a viable salary saver. He's actually somebody I'm glad you mentioned, because I had forgotten all about him. But yeah, he's definitely someone that needs to start being put on the radar, at least until his price starts coming up. Some of the sites are raising prices faster than some of the other ones are. The ones that are lagging behind on him, I think he's still a viable cheap punt option.
All right, fair enough. So the last thing I want to sort of take a look at here is, what you want to do in terms of like GPP strategy. Are you willing to take like the top 4 off the board, maybe even the top 5 in Kyle Lowry, and say, hey, I'll start my lineups with Isaiah Thomas and a couple of value guys like maybe Drew Holiday there down forward, and then go forward from there. Maybe even Rajon Rondo, or do you feel like no matter what lineup you have to have exposure to a top 5 guy?
Well, here's the way I look at it. When I put together tournament teams, what I try to do is think about what other people aren't doing. So for me, what other people won't be doing will be paying up for Westbrook and Paul in the same game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that do that. I would rather do that to be contrarian than not play either one of those guys, because at least one, if not both of them, are putting up 50 points, in my opinion. So even if you go down to some of these other guys, like, that game is going to be a game that has a 220 total, maybe even higher than that. So you're going to need exposure to it. And if you're going to have exposure to it, you want to have exposure to the high usage guys in that game. And, when it comes to OKC, the high usage guys are Westbrook and Durant. When it comes to the Clippers, the highest usage guy they have is Chris Paul. So fading both of those guys, I think, is a fool's errand, because you're basically saying if you're going down to guys like in the 6 or 7 or 8 range, like Thomas and Drew Holiday, you're basically saying, I think both Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul are going to have bad games on the same day in a game with a total of 220. It's just not the highest likelihood situation for me. So I think if I wanted to be contrarian, what I would do is play both of them and then try to make everything else worse there. But I think that most people are definitely going to have at least one or the other one on, a good portion of their lineups.
All right, fair enough. I think that's no matter, for me personally, no matter what happens, there's somebody in that spot or in the top 5. I think I just have to have exposure to, and you can sort of just say, all right, even if I'm with the field in my GPP with some of these guys, I'll look for value and sort of try to create some GPP differentiation with the other person that I want at my point guard spot, or other places throughout my some level of safety is how I feel fairly secure about at least getting into the cash spot, and then we can talk about how we can hit a home run in the GPP, in another spot that we feel a little bit more confidently about. So speaking about confidence here, we've got another guy that we may need to go back to the well on, or maybe not. Will Barton here at the shooting guard position, James Harden up top, DeMar DeRozan, CJ McCollum. What do you got for your shooting guard position here for Wednesday?
Yeah, I will have 100. I have 100% Will Barton exposure on this slate, and the reason for that is I agree with you. I think some people got burned the other night and are going to be off him, but the same reasoning that you used to put him in your lineup on Monday night, the same reasoning you used to put him in your lineup on Monday night is the same reasoning that you should be using to put him in there on Wednesday night. Danilo Gallinari is out. We saw this guy have huge numbers when Gallinari's out. We were paying, 7,000 plus on FanDuel and, 6,800, 6,900 on DraftKings for 45 points. So if you're able to get this guy now for $1,000 to $1,500 cheaper than we were paying for him, 2 months ago when he was in the same situation, I think you just roll out there and you take it. So on FanDuel, he's probably going to be somewhere in the 6K range. Again, 30 fantasy points. I know he missed doing that last time, but it wasn't like it was really the greatest matchup either. So, I think that he's definitely somebody who should be in play. Moving on from there, I don't think I'm going to pay up for James Harden here on the day. I know it's a good game against New Orleans. It should be high scoring, but Harden's been a little bit underperforming lately. I don't think he has huge GPP upside. For upside, I think you can look at guys like Victor Oladipo, especially if Evan Fournier's out. He gets a little bit of an uptick in usage, and he's still a little bit cheap for where he should be because of the less minutes he was getting when they were crowded there with all the players before the Harris trade. I think Eric Gordon is a great play, especially if his price stays down. I think he was like 4,600 or 4,700 on FanDuel the other day. If he stays that cheap, to me, he's almost a must play. You just got to kind of lock and load him, especially with all the injuries that they have, all the guys that are out. I think he can easily get you 25 fantasy points and has 35, 40 fantasy point upside. And then the last guy I'm going to stick with, as long as he stays at 4,400, if Derrick Rose is out, I think Etuan Moore is somebody who I'm going to be looking at too. So those are the guys that I kind of have, on my radar for Wednesday night.
All right, I think those guys are all great calls. I'm with you. I still want to take a gander at Jamal Crawford at the 5K price point there. We're talking about almost 6x that he produced against Brooklyn, and the 22 fantasy points was actually the low point over the past 3 games against Sacramento. So good matchup for him once again against OKC. Andre Roberson and Dion Waiters have been bottom 5 in DVP all season long, so it's a great combo for him to take advantage of. And if he gets second team defense there as well, it's like Cameron Payne, maybe Randy Foye. No matter what he's into a good spot there as well. And I also like Jordan Clarkson once again for the Wednesday slate facing Denver on the road. It's going to be a lot of Gary Harris defense, which we've been targeting all season long, or at least I have. So I'm with you on Harden, Barton for max exposure there as well. And after that, we can still, talk about the guys that you talk about as well, each one more and like. You can sort of mix and match in your GPPs and still probably come out with a solid lineup, in that same price range. All right, before we move on to the small forward position, we'll let all the pod listeners know, all the YouTube watchers, the live streamers, if you're not subscribing to rotowire.com yet, what are you waiting for? If you like all the advice of the podcast and the show, if you watch us on the YouTube or live stream, you want to get involved with the same information that we use here to set up our daily fantasy lineups, you can take advantage of a 10-day free trial for free at rotowire.com/pod. I know, for free trial. It's like, it's not self-explanatory enough, Josh. Sorry, guys. Lineup optimizers are available for 8 different DFS sites. All the major sports covered: MLB, NBA, NFL, college basketball, college football. There's probably bocce ball, for all I know, in development right now. They're always coming up with new stuff. We've got customizable league projections, optimum depth charts, complete draft kits for all the major sports. If you like all the information that we have broken down for you on the show, you can take advantage of it for yourself on a 10-day free trial. Rotowire.com/pod. Let them know Josh and Benny sent you. Small forward up next. Let's talk about what you're putting down at the 3 here for Wednesday.
Yeah, a bunch of guys in the mid-range that I like, mostly for cash games, though. Guys that I just think are real solidly priced that you can use. The 3 that really stand out to me are Matt Barnes at 5K, Trevor Ariza at around 6K, and let me just check on Jay Crowder's price here. Yeah, he's been about 6K as well. Crowder in 3 of his last 4 games has gone 5X or better with, 31, 37, 45, and 28 fantasy points. Ariza in 4 of his last 5 games, 43, 32, 32, 49 fantasy points. Matt Barnes, 5X or better in 3 of his last 4, 39. He had a bad game of 15, and then came back with 26 and 32, and he's only around 5K. So I think value-wise, there's a bunch of those guys. You can go down to your boy Hizonia, who's 35, 3,600 and has been putting up 20. But like I said, I need more upside out of a guy really for me. But I think those guys in that price range is where I'm going to go for cash. Now for a tournament, I think that I'd probably try to take one of them and then look for somebody with some upside, one of the more expensive options. The one who I've been looking at and rolling a lot lately is the Greek Freak. He had a huge game again yesterday, put up like 60 fantasy points. Had another game a couple days ago where he put up like 75 fantasy points. And even on his basically his floor games lately, he's been giving you like 40-something fantasy points. So I know his price has crept up to like the 8K range, but he's somebody that I want to have some GPP exposure to on the slate. So in GPPs, I'm probably going to try to have him in there to, one of the guys like a Barnes or an Ariza, or a Crowder, who I think are the guys in the better matchups, to round it out. And in cash, I'd probably look at 2 of those guys in that 5 to 6K range in order to, save some money to spend up elsewhere and still feel like I have a pretty safe floor.
All right, that makes a ton of sense for me overall. So I think there's a nice little value in the bottom range between Ariza, Barnes, and Tobias Harris in those particular spots. And I can even make a case in GPPs for like a guy like Shabazz Muhammad, who has came up with a big scoring performance against Dallas. A little bit harder for him to replicate, but we're talking about under 4K, so nice little gamble if you really heavy at the 3 for some reason, or you're spent up after the first 2 positions, and you really need to look for value in your GBPs. But Barnes against Sacramento is going to be a good spot for me. We're talking about 5.1 and 6.5x in the past 2 games, and Rudy Gay potentially out of this lineup there as well. So Omri Caspi defense is something you can also take advantage of. So Barnes is going to be a little cheat code for me for Wednesday at the 3. In my DFS cash and GPP safe in my mind overall, and keep tabs too on Omri Caspi as well if you feel like you want to create some GPP differentiation. Most people don't want to face Memphis defense overall, but you don't need too much from Caspi overall. We're talking about 23, 24 fantasy points to get you 5x, and then everything else after that is GPP gravy. All right, power forward up next. Let's go ahead and talk about what you want to do at the 4 for the Wednesday slate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of viable options.
Brown cash.
Yeah, Aaron Gordon is somebody who I'm looking at again. At least 5x in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In his last 9 games, he's gotten at least 5x in each one of them. So he's putting up at least 30-something fantasy points for you. On FanDuel, his price is it's been slowly moving up. So you're probably looking at about 6,500 here, which would mean you need like 32 fantasy points to give you value, and somewhere around like 39 to give you upside. He's flashed that upside in the last game, and he's shown that 32-point floor. So I really like him. Kenneth Fareed has been playing really well. His price is only about 6K. He's given you 36 fantasy points, 37 in his last 3. So he's giving you 6x, even if they raise his price a little bit. So he's somebody else I'm looking at. Zach Randolph, 3 of his last 4 games, he's giving you about 5x. He doesn't have a ton of upside. I like him more for cash games, but I think he's viable. My favorite play on the day, unless they jack his price up, though, we talked about Jabari Parker the other day, and he's still not getting a lot of love, especially over on FanDuel with his. He stays in that $5,600 to $5,900 range. He's cheaper than all the other guys who I already mentioned that are 6K or above. So if he stays below 6K, he's almost lock and load for me at this point. 31 for 6.7x, 36.7x. 45 for 9x, 33 for 6x, 32 for 6x. A bad game against Detroit where he only had 21 fantasy points. And then he came back with 47 fantasy points against Houston in the last one for 8x. So that's been his last 6 games. I mean, if you're going to get a guy who can pretty much give you like a 6x floor with 7, 8, and 9x kind of upside, again, unless his price jumps about $1,000, Jabari Parker is probably my favorite play to roll out there. And then the only other guy who I'm looking at as well, Marvin Williams for Charlotte has been playing pretty well. My only problem with him is his price is starting to come up there. And, like I said, if I can get Jabari Parker for cheaper than Marvin Williams and Aaron Gordon and, Zach Randolph and all those other guys who Jabari Parker for me is the lock and load. And then, depending on how things shake out, I'll probably be looking at one of those other guys in that low to mid $6,000 price range to build my rosters with.
All right, fair enough. For me, I'm with you on all the calls. I think you can actually make a case at this point to maybe jump in on Miles Turner, but in the same price range. Where your boys Marvin Williams and Jabari Parker have been more productive and safer, so I'll probably roll with you in that spot there as well. If they do, depending on what happens too, I'm probably okay with Zach Randolph against Sacramento there as well. I would probably prefer it if he was going to be playing the 4 rather than the 5, because I think it's a little bit tougher matchup, one-on-one versus Cousins. But you can still make a case there because Sacramento's been being scored on a pretty high level. I mean, they give out another 130 points at home to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So there's something to keep tabs on. And the one guy I definitely want to pay attention to is Ryan Anderson for me at the power forward position. We're talking about 5.1, 6.1, and 10.1x. So he's been just progressively getting hotter and hotter. Big double-double, 31 and 14 in 40-plus minutes against the Minnesota Timberwolves in a 2-point loss. So I think they finally are hopefully going to continue to ramp up the production because, hey, look what happens. You give Ryan Anderson more minutes, and he makes it rain. It's amazing. It's amazing how
now do we know the status of Anthony Davis for this game? I thought he was coming back.
He's currently listed as questionable, but I think that either way, because even when he was getting 25-ish minutes within the 2 games previous to that against OKC and Washington, 2 playoff teams from last season, still paid off the price tag. I still think so. I think the floor is cash safe and then GPP upside if Brown does not play. If Brown doesn't play, then we're talking max exposure here. You would agree with me? Am I correct?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. If Anthony Davis doesn't play, he's the first guy you put in your roster. Right, you start with Ryan Anderson in there, and everybody else should be doing the same thing. And you're playing, on FanDuel, you're playing 8-on-8 on Wednesday if Anthony Davis is out, because you have last game 50-something or 40-something fantasy points subbing in for Anthony Davis. If Davis is out, your automatic first reaction should be, all right, well, I'm playing.
Exactly. That's it. Just start your lineups with that guy and then move forward with the rest of the action. What I'm saying though is, regardless of the matchup, you can make a case for him there as a play as well. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the question I was asking you. Is like even with Brow in, would you still be that high on him?
Probably more of a little bit of just a sneakier cash safe play, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who are still in on like Gorgie Jang, who's a fine play. Commissioner Gordon, I still love, and then we talked about some of the plays below that, like Derek Favors and Randolph, Jabari Parker, Marvin Williams, all obviously good options, but not enough people are talking about Ryan Anderson with Brown in the lineup, and I still think he's personally viable. So he'll be more hidden for sure.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to I wanted to add something in real quick too. Is Jeremy Grant power forward or small forward on FanDuel?
I will grant you this. Okay, Jeremy Grant is power forward eligible on FanDuel.
Okay, that's what I thought. He's another guy that I want to make sure I mention before we move on, because even if Okafor's in, like Okafor was out last game and he put up a good game, but even the game before when Okafor's in, he's starting to get more minutes. So he's somebody that's like really close to the floor pricing wise that can give you some upside. So keep him on your radar as well, especially if you hear that Okafor is going to be out or Noel's going to be out. Whenever I hear that one of those two are out, the first guy I usually wind up taking a harder look at is always Jeremy Grant. So I think he's somebody else at the power forward spot on FanDuel. I thought he was a power forward over there. That's why I asked the question. So I think he's somebody else that we could look at as a cheap salary saver as well.
Yep, makes total sense to me overall. So I think we're sufficiently covered everything that you could possibly do at the power forward position. So before we move on to centers, we have to let all the business owners know that, hey, do you have a website? Maybe you don't. If you don't have a website yet, maybe you need to talk about Wix.com here with all your business partners. No matter what business you're in, Wix.com has something for you. Used by more than 75 million people worldwide, Wix.com makes it easy to get your website live today. You need to get the word out about your business, and it all starts with a stunning website. So with hundreds of designer-made, customizable templates to choose from, the drag-and-drop editor, there's no coding needed. You don't need to be a programmer or designer to create something beautiful. You can do it yourself with Wix.com. Wix.com empowers business owners to create their own professional websites each and every day. So when you're running your own business, you're bound to be busy. Too busy to worry about the budgets, the scheduling appointments, or building a website for your business. And because you're too busy, it has to be easy, and that's where Wix.com comes in. With Wix.com, it's easy and free. Go to Wix.com to create your own website today. The results will be stunning. All right, center position up. Let's talk about what you're putting down here for the Wednesday slate.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a big score with all these studs up towards the top. So I think you have to pick one of them and pay up on this slate. There's two guys that I'm looking at. If I can afford to, I'd go up and take Boogie Cousins. I'm not as scared of this Memphis matchup as some other people are. Remember, when you look at these DVP numbers are usually aggregated over the course of the season. What we know now that's going on in Memphis is that they don't have Zach Randolph in there. I'm sorry, they don't have Marc Gasol in there anymore, and Gasol was a very good defensive player. So I think that it's a much softer matchup going up against Memphis. And we've also seen Memphis play at, games that have been a little bit higher scoring lately. They don't have Tony Allen. They don't have Marc Gasol. It's not the same lockdown defense, that we usually think of Memphis as. They do still play at a little bit of a slower pace, and I think that's going to happen anytime you have Zach Randolph on the floor. He's not the kind of guy that's going to be running up and down and, finishing in transition like a Blake Griffin does. So I do think that, that is a little bit of a tick down, but I think Sacramento plays so fast anyway that this is still going to be a game with the total at like 210 in this matchup. So I think Cousins is perfectly fine to roll out there. I would have no problem doing so. He's giving you 55, 60 fantasy points every time he steps on the floor. We know that he's a big part of that team. If, Rudy Gay and or Rondo are out, I think that only just kind of ups his usage a little more. So he's my favorite option. Now, coming down from him, because he's more expensive than everybody else on the floor here, coming down for him, I think that the guy that I would drop down to is probably Dwight Howard at the 8K range going up against the New Orleans Pelicans. Pelicans have been struggling to stop centers all season long. Dwight Howard's been playing a lot better lately. He's got, let me see, I was just looking at the game logs here. He's got 43, 33, 44, 40, 24, 45, 35, 42 in his last 8 games. So he's got basically 5 games where he scored 40 fantasy points, which would be the 5x that we need at his price tag of about 8K here. I think New Orleans and Houston is going to be one of the higher totals on the day. We know that New Orleans struggles, defensively against big guys. We know that Dwight Howard has been playing better lately, so there's a lot of things going in his favor. So if I'm not willing to pay up the 10K plus, I need to get the DeMarcus Cousins. I think I'm going to go down to 8K and take Dwight Howard, but I think you do need to pay up from one of the centers here. There's a couple other guys like Vucevic is not in a horrible spot. Pau Gasol going up against him on the other side. Towns in a high total game against Washington with all the other big guys hurt on Minnesota. I think all these guys are basically viable. But for me, it's either going to be DeMarcus Cousins or Dwight Howard, but I definitely think you need to pay up for, somebody at the center position on the slate.
Yeah, I'm good with essentially like 5 of the top 6 overall. Cousins for cash for sure. Big Cat also has a cash level price, and then or if you want to go with Gasol or Vucci against each other, that makes some sense to me overall as well. And I think you can actually even go down to somebody like Greg Monroe against Indiana, or if you feel like gambling just a little bit more, Jokic against the LA Lakers. To me is probably where I would draw the line in terms of like GPP upside for a cheap value price. We're talking about 5,500. It's been very inconsistent in terms of the minutes, but the LA Lakers is the spot where you want to jump back in terms of production at the center spot. So that's wherever I'll draw the line. Anybody else that you want to stump for before we put a bow on the show?
Not really. I mean, like guys like Jan Mahimi have been playing pretty well lately. Pretty good matchup against Milwaukee, who struggles against big guys. Maybe like a Steven Adams against the Clippers there. I think they're going to need him for a lot of minutes, to kind of go up against DeAndre Jordan. But like I said, I mean, I think that at least 1 or 2 of those top 5 or 6 guys are going to put up like a 50, 60 fantasy point game. So if you're going to be getting 40, 50, 60 fantasy points out of 1 or 2 of those guys up top, you're not going to be able to build a winning roster if you go down and take one of these punt guys and get even if they hit 6x value and they get you 28 fantasy points, I think you're going to be leaving yourself too much to make up at the other positions. So for me, I think it's just best that, you save some money for the center spot and pay up for, like I said, I like Cousins if I can afford him. If not, I think Howard is that guy in the next tier that I would go after. But I would be okay. And I think you can make a case for, like you said, like 4 or 5 of these guys that are up there. So whoever your favorite center at the 8K plus or around 8K range is, I think you just need to roll them out there. I don't think it's a spot you can save on Wednesday.
Yeah, I agree there as well. And I've been probably a little bit too harsh on Howard overall, but he's been a crusher at the center position, and definitely a cheaper price than Big Cat Karl-Anthony Towns. So between the two, I think you have to lean Howard because you get such a significant cost savings from similar production. So that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah,
for the
I like Towns. Yeah, I was just gonna say I like Towns more, but the price on Howard is too good compared to these other guys that are above him. So that's really why I like him the most.
Yeah, 110% agree with you there as well. Similar production. If I had to choose one overall who scores higher, probably Towns. But for value and price tag return, it's got to be Howard against Omar Sheik defense, which has been juicy for opponents all season long. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. Don't forget to check us out on iTunes and Stitcher. You can press subscribe to the Rotowire DFS podcast on the official YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out Benny on Twitter at BennyR11, at Josh Hayes FS, and at Rotowire for all your season-long and DFS needs throughout this fine NBA season. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.